I've spent the better part of a month rewatching Squid Game, analyzing every twisted decision, every cold-blooded execution, and every single crime the frontman has ever committed. And one thing has become crystal clear. This man isn't just a puppet following orders, he is Squid Game's deadliest executioner. He's the man behind the mask, the one who pulls the trigger, the one who watches people fight for survival like it's just another day at the office. Sure, he might not be as flashy as the VIPs betting billions on human suffering. He might not be as physically terrifying as the masked guards who enforce the rules. But make no mistake, without him, the games wouldn't exist. And if justice actually existed in this world, the frontman wouldn't just be hiding behind a mask, sipping whiskey in a neon-lit control room. He'd be locked up for life, facing a prison sentence so long, even death row would seem merciful. Because this isn't just a game. This is mass murder. And today, we're going to break down his crimes one by one and find out exactly how long the frontman would rot behind bars. The most twisted part of all of this, the frontman wasn't always a villain. Before he became the silent enforcer of the Squid Games, he was Hwang In-ho, a highly respected police officer, a man who had sworn to uphold the law, to protect people, to serve justice. And yet, here he is, not just breaking the law, but rewriting the very definition of cruelty. Now, there are plenty of ways to fall into a life of crime. Some criminals start young, growing up in broken homes, trapped in cycles of violence. Some are pushed into crime by desperation. Others are born into corruption, following in the footsteps of the powerful men before them. But the front man, he had every opportunity to walk away. Unlike the 456 desperate players thrown into the game with no way out, he had a choice. At some point, he stood at a crossroads. He could have fought against the system, exposed the truth, or dismantled the operation from the inside. Instead, he chose to wear the mask. He chose to become the system. And that's what makes his crimes so much worse. Let's get something very, very clear. The frontman isn't just following orders. He isn't reluctantly enforcing the games. He is the executioner. He personally pulls the trigger. He chooses when to kill. And when he does it, there's no hesitation. Take player 111, for example, the disgraced doctor, secretly working with the guards, harvesting organs in exchange for clues about the next game. Now, you'd think, as a former police officer, the frontman would know a thing or two about due process, investigations, and, I don't know, actual justice? Nope. Instead, he drags player 111 out into the open, monologues about fairness for 5 seconds, and executes him on the spot. No trial, no second chances. Just one bullet straight to the skull. And it doesn't stop there. The frontman is responsible for every single execution of eliminated players. If a contestant refuses to follow the rules, he doesn't order someone else to take care of it. He does it himself. In real life, this wouldn't just be murder. This would be systematic execution. In most legal systems, first-degree murder is punishable by life in prison, or even the death penalty. And considering the frontman has executed dozens, if not hundreds, of people, his prison sentence wouldn't just be long, it would be never-ending. Now, before we go any further, let's take a second to address something important. Unlike the contestants in Squid Game, you actually have a choice. No masked guards are standing behind you with guns. No creepy robotic doll is watching your every move. But there is one rule. If you don't hit subscribe, there's a chance that the frontman himself might personally show up at your house and drag you into a real-life game of red light, green light. So do yourself a favor. Hit that button, turn on notifications, and make sure justice is served. Because trust me, if we're putting criminal masterminds like this on trial, you're not going to want to miss what comes next. Now, back to the front man. At this point, you might be thinking, all right, he's guilty of cold-blooded murder. That's already enough to lock him up forever. What more could he possibly have done? Oh, so much more. Because the front man doesn't just kill. He enforces a system of mass murder. Think about it. The Squid Games aren't just some illegal betting ring. They're a multi-billion-dollar high-stakes death tournament, orchestrated by the world's richest sociopaths. And the frontman? He is the bridge between the VIPs and the bloodbath. He manages the entire operation, from selecting the contestants to ensuring the games run smoothly. He isn't just guilty of murder. He is guilty of crimes against humanity. Because when you strip away the masks, the theatrics, the neon lights. This isn't just a game. This is a mass execution disguised as entertainment. And in the real world, there is no escaping the consequences. The question isn't whether the frontman would be locked away. The question is how many lifetimes he would serve. And trust me, we're only just getting started. By now, we've already proven beyond a doubt that the frontman is a ruthless killer. He isn't some reluctant participant, forced into the games like the desperate contestants. He isn't a powerless employee, blindly following orders. He is the architect of death, the one who ensures the games run like a well-oiled execution machine. And if you thought cold-blooded murder was the worst crime on his record, you're about to see just how deep this rabbit hole goes. Because the frontman isn't just a killer, he's a war criminal, and in any real court of law, he wouldn't just be serving life in prison, he'd be standing trial in front of the entire world. Let's take a step back. Forget the brutal executions. Forget the point-blank murders. Forget the fact that he personally ends lives without a second thought. Because the frontman's crimes go beyond individual killings. His true evil? He runs an organized system of mass murder. Think about it. The Squid Game isn't just a secret underground competition. It's a fully structured, industrialized death trap. From the moment the contestants step inside, they aren't just players. They are human sacrifices. Stripped of their names, given numbers instead of identities, locked inside a facility where their only purpose is to die for entertainment. And the frontman? He doesn't just supervise the games. He ensures every part of the machine keeps running. The guards, the weapons, the execution process, the mass cremation of bodies after each game. If this were real life, he wouldn't just be a criminal. He would be one of the most infamous war criminals in modern history. In legal terms, this is the textbook definition of crimes against humanity. And if you need a real-world comparison, think of the Nuremberg trials, where war criminals who orchestrated systematic mass killings were sentenced to life in prison, or worse. In any functioning legal system, the frontman would be locked away forever. But let's not stop there, because he's guilty of far more than mass murder. He's guilty of one of the most horrifying crimes in modern history: forced organ trafficking. You might remember Player 111, the disgraced doctor who was secretly working with the guards. Now, most contestants were killed in the games, but Player 111? He was keeping certain bodies intact because their organs were valuable on the black market. That's right. The Squid Games weren't just profiting from the deaths of desperate people. They were literally cutting them open and selling their body parts to the highest bidder. And if you think for even a second that the frontman wasn't aware of this operation, you're kidding yourself. A black market organ ring doesn't exist in a highly secured, controlled environment like the Squid Games without approval from the top. And when he finally cracks down on the guards running the scheme, does he stop the violence? Does he expose the corruption? He executes every single person involved, covering up the operation instead of reporting it. Now, let's get something clear. Organ trafficking is one of the most severe crimes in the world. International law recognizes it as a form of human trafficking, and in most countries, it's punishable by life in prison. The frontman's involvement, whether direct or indirect, would make him guilty by association, which means his prison sentence just doubled. At this point, his crimes aren't just stacking up, they're escalating to a level of horror only reserved for history's worst criminals. And the worst part? We're still not done. Because on top of war crimes, mass murder, and human trafficking, the frontman is guilty of something even worse, something that makes his betrayals personal. And it's the one crime that proves he was never forced into this. He chose it. The moment police officer Hwang Jun-ho infiltrated the Squid Games, he thought he was getting closer to exposing the truth. Instead, he came face to face with the one person he never expected to see, his own brother. That's right, the same Hwang In-ho who went missing years ago, who was once a respected cop, a man of integrity, was now standing in front of him as the cold, unfeeling executioner of the games. And when Jun-ho refused to back down, when he tried to expose the truth, the frontman didn't hesitate. He shot his own brother and left him for dead. At that moment, any doubt about his loyalty to the games was erased. Because when you execute your own family to protect a death tournament, there's no coming back. In real life, this wouldn't just be murder. It would be the ultimate betrayal, and it would be the final nail in the coffin of his prison sentence. Because at this point, he isn't just going to prison, he's never seeing the outside world again. And yet, somehow, we still have more to cover. Because the frontman's most unforgivable crime? It isn't murder, it isn't human trafficking, it isn't even the betrayal of his own blood. It's the reason the games exist in the first place. The real masterminds behind the slaughter. By now, we've ripped the mask off and seen the frontman for who he really is. A man who personally executed players with no hesitation. A man who oversaw a system of mass murder disguised as a competition. A man who allowed human trafficking to happen under his watch and covered it up with more executions. And just when you think, okay, he's already guilty of enough crimes to be locked up for multiple lifetimes, it gets even worse. Because the frontman wasn't just an enforcer, he was a willing servant to the most powerful, untouchable criminals on the planet. The ones who started it all, the VIPs. And in real life, working for these monsters wouldn't just make him an accomplice, it would guarantee that he never sees the outside world again. At first glance, the frontman looks like he's in charge. He calls the shots, controls the guards, and maintains absolute order in the games. But in reality, he's just another pawn. The real masterminds behind Squid Game are the faceless billionaires who treat human lives like poker chips. They don't play the games. They don't pull the triggers. They watch. Hidden away in luxury skyboxes, wearing grotesque golden masks, sipping top-shelf whiskey while placing bets on which contestant will die next.
96!
And the front man? He doesn't just work for them. He caters to their every whim. He makes sure their entertainment never stops. He delivers them a fresh batch of contestants every year, knowing full well none of them will survive. In real life, this wouldn't just be illegal gambling. This would be a global-scale conspiracy. We're talking organized crime, racketeering, kidnapping, and mass murder, on a level so massive, it would shake entire governments. And if the front man was ever caught, he wouldn't just be serving his own sentence. He would be the key witness in the biggest criminal trial the world has ever seen. But the worst part, even if the Squid Game was exposed to the public, the VIPs would walk free. Because people like them, they don't go to prison, they buy their way out. And the front man, he'd be the one left to take the fall. Now, let's talk about how the contestants actually get here. Because it's not just a game. It's a system designed to exploit the desperate. Every year, Squid Game targets society's most vulnerable people. The ones drowning in debt, struggling to survive, trapped in a system that offers them no way out. And what do? They make them believe they have a choice. But let's be honest, it was never a choice. The moment you get abducted in that black van, the moment you wake up in that pink jumpsuit, your life isn't your own anymore. And the front man? He oversees all of it. The selection process, the transportation, the security that makes sure no one escapes. And in the real world, this wouldn't just be illegal imprisonment. This would be kidnapping, human trafficking, unlawful detainment. In most countries, kidnapping alone carries a life sentence. And when it's done on a massive scale, targeting hundreds of victims every year, there is no parole. There is no getting out. The front man's prison sentence just doubled. And we haven't even talked about the games themselves. Because if you thought recruiting these people was bad, wait until you see how he justifies their deaths. The most twisted thing about the front man? He actually believes he's running a fair system. He tells himself, everyone has an equal chance. The games are fair. But let's take a closer look at that, shall we? If the games were truly fair, would rich, powerful men be watching from their VIP lounges, placing bets on human lives? If the games were truly fair, would players be drugged, kidnapped, and forced to sign a contract they barely understand? If the games were truly fair, would contestants be slaughtered like cattle for breaking minor rules, while the organizers cover up their own corruption? No, this isn't about fairness. It never was. This is modern-day gladiator combat, built on lies and manipulation. And the front man, he's the one holding the keys to the Colosseum. In real life, this would be classified as premeditated murder, mass manslaughter. The law wouldn't just lock him up, it would throw away the key. At this point, there's no legal system on Earth that would ever let him see the light of day again. And the only real question left is, how long would that sentence actually be? Because trust me, we've done the math. And in Now, we're giving the frontman his final verdict. We've peeled back every layer of the frontman's crimes. We've seen him execute innocent people without hesitation. We've seen him run an industrialized system of mass murder. We've seen him cover up organ trafficking, kidnap hundreds, and betray his own brother. And now, it's time for the final question. If the frontman were ever caught, exposed, and dragged into a real courtroom, how long would his prison sentence be? Would it be a few decades, life in prison? Or would his crimes be so massive, so horrifying, that even multiple life sentences wouldn't be enough? Well, we did the math. And trust me, he's not getting out. Ever. Let's be clear, there isn't a single legal system in the world that would ever give the frontman a normal prison sentence. In most countries, even the worst criminals, mass murderers, warlords, people responsible for genocide, usually get one life sentence. Maybe 2 or 3 if the crimes are horrific enough. But the frontman? He wouldn't just get a few life sentences. His crimes are so numerous, so extensive, so premeditated, that his prison time wouldn't be counted in years. It would be counted in centuries. Let's take a look at the real-world charges he'd be facing. Mass murder, life in prison, multiplied by hundreds of victims, crimes against humanity, no parole, ever, organ trafficking and human trafficking, a lifetime behind bars, kidnapping and illegal detainment, another 100+ years, conspiracy and racketeering. At least 50 more. If we're being extremely generous and only counting the confirmed deaths on screen, the frontman would still be looking at 800 years in prison. If we're counting every single victim across multiple Squid Games, his sentence would break records. We're talking several thousand years in prison, no chance of parole, no appeals, no possibility of release. And that's assuming he even makes it to prison. Because in most legal systems, crimes like this, on a scale this massive, don't just end in prison, they end with capital punishment. In some countries, the frontman wouldn't be locked away forever. He would be facing execution. And honestly, that's still a quicker escape than any of his victims got. But here's the worst part. None of this is going to happen. Because in the world of Squid Game, the frontman isn't facing justice. He's still out there running the games, bringing in a fresh batch of contestants every year. He didn't get sentenced. He wasn't put on trial. He wasn't caught. He got away with every single crime. And that's the most terrifying part of all. Because in real life, people like the frontman exist. They might not be running a literal Squid Game, but there are systems in place that exploit the desperate. There are people in power who profit from suffering. And there are real-life VIPs who sit behind the scenes, untouched, unpunished, and untouchable. So maybe the frontman's real punishment isn't a prison sentence. Maybe it's knowing that no matter how much power he has, someday, somewhere, someone is going to expose him. And when that day comes, there won't be a mask left to hide behind. And before you go, don't let the frontman get away with this. Subscribe to Cartoon Courtroom and help us put more villains on trial. And while you're at it, head to the comments and tell us, what punishment do you think the frontman deserves the most? Because at this point, a life sentence might not even be enough.